I'm Coach Jamie Dreyer from Overhaul Training, and in this video I'm going to show you how to release trigger points from a weak lower trapezius using the Pure Wave and also a little tool I call the Peanut. Then I'm going to go ahead and briefly explain to you how this muscle works and what its most common reason for ending up with issues is. And then last, I'm going to go ahead and show you my most favorite exercise for getting this particular muscle strong so it could do its job better in the future. For trigger points in the lower trapezius, I use the point stick on the Pure Wave. And the most common spot you're going to find a trigger point in your lower trap is going to be on the bottom inside of your scapula. So, scapula, remember, is your wing bone here. Here's the lower point of mine, right? If I come just inside a little bit and up, this is where you're going to want to look. Throw the sucker on and dig in. You like how I did that with one hand? Pretty good, right? The other tool that I told you about, I called it the Peanut, is essentially two tennis balls taped together. And what you do with this is you lie down on the floor and you try and place this between your shoulder blades with your spine running down between the two balls, and you essentially just look around for that same trigger point we were hitting with the Pure Wave, and in this case you're putting your body weight into it, which, just so you know, so you're not surprised when you get there, it can be pretty intense. Most people find it awfully uncomfortable, but it's another way of getting at the same trigger point using more pressure. All right, gang, anatomy refresher time. Here we go. If you imagine your lower rib and how it runs around and then meets up with your spine, if you go ahead and put two fingers on that particular vertebrae where the ribs attach, and then crawl them up your back to right between your shoulder blades, and if you look at all these vertebrae down there, they all have the lower trapezius attaching to them. And all these different fibers basically come up and wrap around kind of like a V and attach to your scapulas. And when they engage, they help pull your scapula down, and then also they help pull your back into extension. And the most common time that this is going to be called upon to do its job is when you're using your arms in front of you. Right? You need to kind of help lift, get that scapula down and out of the way as the arm comes up so that the humerus, your arm bone, doesn't bump into your shoulder bone and cause an impingement. And then also, as you want to bring things up in front of you, you're going to be better off going into extension because you can have better range up overhead. So see how that works? Makes sense, right? Okay, so now the most common way in which we have problems with that is when we sit at our computer in a very poor posture, unsupported. So already you can see where I'm doing the opposite of what the muscle does. So what that means is the muscle's getting stretched. But then I'm doing this little stuff on the computer with the mouse and kind of working on things day after day. And because it's overstretched, but yet I'm still using my arms, the muscle is not in a very good mechanical position to do its job. So it's kind of like it's stretched, but it's hanging on, it's trying to engage. So you end up with these little trigger points where it's holding on, it's fighting to do its job. But the muscle ends up being, because it's stretched, kind of put to sleep, and it can't really function properly. And over time, it gets weak. So what do we do about it? All right, here we go. So now that you have an idea of how the lower trapezius works, we have a good idea of how to strengthen it, right? Once you've done your trigger point work using the Pure Wave, the next thing I recommend doing is we're going to start doing some exercises. So we know that it engages most when we lift our arms up in front of us. And as you get farther back, it engages and gets an even tighter contraction. You could do this 2 arms at a time, but I prefer doing it 1 arm. I just, for some reason, find I get a much better contraction. So this is how we're going to do it. I get a hip hinge, and I'm keeping my back relatively flat. The arm that I'm working on is hanging. I want to try and let that shoulder blade start to sink down a little bit. You should see there's a little bit of a round in my upper back, and my shoulder blade is kind of up and forward. Now, I'm going to make a fist, thumb is up, and as I raise my arm, I'm also taking my shoulder blade and sliding it down my back, and then as I get to the top, you should be able to see that my back is starting to extend a little bit, my upper back particularly. I come back down, my upper back rounds a little bit again, and my shoulder blade slides up and down and forward. Up and forward. Back up. Now I'm sure some of you are real strong out there and you could go ahead and put some heavy weights in your hands, but I highly recommend starting off with just your arm and your hand. That's a good amount of resistance, especially if your trap is weak already. Focus on the very top of the range of motion, getting a really nice strong contraction up there, going for 8 to 12 reps, 2 to 3 sets, and then over time, as it starts to become easy, then you could start adding smaller weights, 2, 3 pounds, 5, 8, maybe you'll become a macho man and even move up to a 10 or a 12 pounder. But 10 or 12 pounds for this particular exercise is a lot of weight. And if you're doing this exercise because you have some issues potentially in your lower trap, you shouldn't be starting off with the high end. So be very humble, start off with just your arm and focus on a really good clean contraction. I'm Coach Jamie Dreyer, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm Coach Jamie Dreyer from Overhaul Training, and in this video I'm going to show you how to release trigger points from a weak lower trapezius using the Pure Wave and also a little tool I call the Peanut. Then I'm going to go ahead and briefly explain to you how this muscle works and what its most common reason for ending up with issues is. And then last, I'm going to go ahead and show you my most favorite exercise for getting this particular muscle strong so it could do its job better in the future. For trigger points in the lower trapezius, I use the point stick on the Pure Wave. And the most common spot